Нужно, братцы, нам проснуться, мы задумать.
Welcome to the fourth episode of Doukhobor Life in Canada. In this episode, we will look at the conflicts between the Doukhobors in British Columbia over enrollment in public schools, registration, and their communal lifestyle. We will also feature the murder of Peter the Lordly at 65 years of age. In the early 1900s, British Columbia's demographic was primarily of British descent. Minorities in general were often reviled, including the Doukhobors. They became known with the derogatory label Dukes, sometimes Dirty Dukes, including other disparaging names. Amongst the local population, attitudes of prejudice and intolerance grew towards the Doukhobors. Anti-Doukhobor sentiments were normalized in BC, apparent in media representations based on misunderstandings and stereotyping. This was evident in media, newspapers, magazines, and even scholarly reports. The question of schooling was complicated. The Christian Community of Universal Brotherhood, CCUB, either accepted schooling with limitations or did not accept schooling at all. In 1911, the Grand Forks School District built a school, and with it, Doukhobor children began to attend. In 1912, the CCUB built a school on their land near Brilliant, with an all-community board and attended by the community children. The government viewed this as a victory and assumed they would submit to other legal requirements. However, this was short-lived. It had happened that 4 community men were arrested for failing to register a death. The men were arrested and sentenced to 3 months in a Nelson prison. This led to a CCUB boycott of schools, including a decision made at a mass meeting not to accept registration laws. Compounding this non-compliance was the introduction of militia and rifle training in public schools in 1912. Local citizens from Grand Forks and Nelson began to express their concerns over the Doukhobors' refusal to integrate into general society. As a result, BC's Premier Richard McBride appointed a royal commission and chose William Blakemore to conduct a series of investigations into Doukhobor affairs. Blakemore's 1912 report did contain sympathetic descriptions about the Doukhobors. He acknowledged them as a people who are moral, industrious, truthful, and honest people. Although he showed understanding for the people, he nevertheless endorsed assimilation, but with a less forceful approach.
What Russian tyranny has utterly failed to do: break up the community, Canadian freedom may affect. Persecution is fuel to the flames of fanaticism, and without the fuel, the fire dies out.
Blakemore included statements from the CCUB in his report. Their response to registration was as follows.
This matter of registry is closely connected with Doukhobor beliefs. Now as ever, we wish to be citizens of the whole earth, and we wish our children to be free. Therefore, we do not want to enter our children's names into the official government registry books. We will not ever register in your books because we consider ourselves already registered by the Creator Himself into the Book of Life, which is called eternity.
The community Doukhobors preferred to educate their children at home by their own cultural and traditional values and practices. Their rejection of public schooling included 3 primary points.
School education teaches and prepares children for military actions. We belong to the class of working people and are trying to earn our sustenance through honest labor, into the boundless school of eternal nature. School and literacy separate people on earth, leading to corruption, harm to the soul, and to life.
While Blakemore called for enforcements of the Public Schools Act, he also recommended winning the community Doukhobor sympathy through the hiring of Russian-speaking teachers and a modification of the school curriculum. However, any chance of assimilation succeeding according to Blakemore's strategies was eliminated by his recommendation to cancel the Doukhobors' exemption from military services. This exemption was one of the primary reasons for the Doukhobor migration to Canada. Blakemore concluded his report with a powerful statement, evoking suspicion from the Doukhobors. He stated that,
"The real problem before the government of British Columbia is not the Doukhobors, but their leader, Peter Verrigan."
This statement leaves one questioning the government's intention when it came to what Blakemore, as government's representative, saw as the Doukhobor problem, namely Peter Vasilyevich Verrigan. Tensions and conflicts over the government's continued demands persisted. In fact, in 1914, William Bowser, the Attorney General, initiated the first anti-Doukhobor legislation in Canada, the Community Regulation Act. This was in response to the CCUB resistance to provide vital statistics and send their children to school. Under the new legislation, fines would be imposed and possessions seized for non-compliance. In December of 1914, Minister Bowser visited the community Doukhobors in Brilliant, along with 5 other government officials to discuss the matter of public schooling. Part of this discussion is as follows.
2 years ago, you built this nice, big building for a school, and you taught children here for 1 year. Some positive reports of progress were received by the teacher. However, later, for some reasons, you closed the school. Now I suggest that you open the school again to continue the learning of literacy. The government considers this to be good and useful.
We have already explained to you before that school education of children is very harmful because in public schools, children are taught to kill in wars. They are given wooden rifles and taught military discipline.
I agree that children are given wooden guns in public schools, but this is only done to develop muscles in children.
We believe that the best way to develop muscles in children would be to give them iron spades to soften the land for vegetable beds around trees and orchards. We find this the most useful way of developing muscles among children. School education has a detrimental effect on the whole life of a person. After a short period of school education, our children started being disobedient to parents, avoiding agricultural labor and household duties at the most vulnerable age. This is why we unanimously declined school and literacy.
I am perplexed. If you consider education so harmful to your children, why did you ask to open schools and built this house suitable for use as a school?
We built this house not for a school, but for prayer meetings. It cost us no more than $500. We compare governmental law with a thick rope, which is woven from many parts. These parts have 3 major, most dangerous components: registry books, school, and swearing allegiance. This is why we will never agree to be woven into this thick rope. Our ancestors in Russia suffered brutally for this cause, and here we are also ready to submit ourselves to suffering.
From the winter of 1914 to 1915, no community children returned to school. A compromise to public schooling was reached when Minister Bowser guaranteed that no paramilitary exercises or religious education would be forced on Doukhobor children. An added stipulation required Peter the Lordly to ensure enrollment. This compromise was accepted and lasted from 1915 to 1922. Although BC's government remained firm on their position of compulsory school attendance. About 2/3 of the community Doukhobor children attended, but for only half the time. In the fall of 1922, the parents began to withdraw their children from school. Without delay, the authorities fined 8 parents and were prepared to seize community goods, but the fines were paid. In the following year, a similar incident took place when the police seized a truck. It was released once the fine was paid. What was considered a triumph by authorities was followed by the first act of arson connected with the Doukhobors in British Columbia. In May 1923, a school was burnt to the ground by an unidentified individual or individuals. It was assumed that it was the acts of the Sons of Freedom, but no evidence to that claim was ever proven. In the months that followed, a total of 9 schools in the Brilliant district were burned down. In each case, the incidents coincided with some attempt on the part of the police to seize property and payment of fines. Peter the Lordly denied any connection with the burnings and attributed the actions to the Sons of Freedom. Although the Sons of Freedom were suspected of setting the fires, this was never confirmed. Rising resentment toward the Doukhobors occurred at the end of World War I in 1918. Into the early 1920s, an active anti-Doukhobor campaign began. Returning soldiers felt they were entitled to the CCUB lands. Their campaign called for their deportation back to Russia because they do not follow Canadian laws. Professor James Maver stepped in to defend the Doukhobors. In 1916, he wrote an open letter to the acting Prime Minister of Canada, Sir Thomas White, explaining that the Soldiers' Settlement Board had no right to carry out expropriations. Mavor stated,
"The life of these unfortunate people has been again and again torn up by the roots, not only in Russia, but in this country, by the action of their respective governments. It is little wonder that they distrust the organization of the state, merely an instrument of oppression and disturbance."
The matter was brought to an end.
Пробудись, человек, от 20.
During the winter of 1923 to 1924, Peter the Lordly called almost daily meetings in Brilliant to discuss spirituality and morality.
Human life, I think, is like a real art. It consists not in quantity and size of things made, but in their quality, beauty, perfection, harmony. Such is our life. We must strive to live it better, not to care how long it would be, as we all know, does not depend on our own will.
He encouraged independent thinking and the development of one's own conscience to make appropriate decisions. He spoke about the fate of the world and warned of the coming of dark events. He understood the temptation and effect of material gain and where this would lead them. For this reason, he often repeated,
The time will come when they are going to put before you tables spread with all types of appetizing foods and drinks. They will invite you to sit at these tables and enjoy the treat. Many of you will be tempted and sit at those tables and be trapped. But I am absolutely certain that a small group of wise Doukhobors shall remain undeceived. They will not betray their ideals. They will not sit down at those tables and not be trapped.
At meetings, Peter the Lordly spoke openly several times about his approaching end. Once, with an unusually deep sadness, he said,
Today, in a dream, I saw Lushechka. She called me to join her. She said to me, Zhurishka, you have suffered enough. Come to us. The third flesh body is already waiting for you. Yes, that is true. No Doukhobor leader served as long as I.
On the 28th of October 1924, Peter the Lordly notified Maria Strelayev to make her way to Brilliant, as she would be accompanying him to Grand Forks by train. She often accompanied him on his trips. It was 10 at night when a small group of people gathered at the train station for the departure of Peter the Lordly and Maria Strelayev. People in Grand Forks were notified in order to meet them upon their arrival in Grand Forks. When the train whistle blew, Peter the Lordly looked out at all those gathered and spoke his last words to them.
Well, brothers, farewell and forgive me. We are going on a faraway journey.
It was 1 a.m. when the train left the station at Ferron. The train did not even travel 1 mile when there was an explosion. A bomb under Peter the Lordly's seat exploded. He was thrown 30 feet down a hill. Maria Strelayev was thrown even further. In the early hours of the 29th of October, the sad news of the death of Peter the Lordly was heard throughout all Doukhobor communities. The terrifying news struck the Doukhobors like a thunderclap. Everyone became afraid. The people were numb with disbelief. They could not believe it was true. People wept in sorrow and fear. For 5 days, the crowds wept over the body of their murdered leader as his body lay in his home in Brilliant. The singers held vigil with song day and night. During these days, everyone mourned together. The community, independents, and Sons of Freedom Doukhobors, including a host of others. They all walked together to look upon the body of their deceased leader and give him a last honor. On the 2nd of November, the coffin with the leader's body was taken out of his home, and a procession of many people left for the cemetery. In the front of the procession was a banner that read, "Toil and Peaceful Life, Peter the Lordly." On this day, the crowd gathered up to 10,000 people. When they arrived at the cemetery, The mournful sounds of psalms and weeping resounded as the coffin was lowered into the grave of carved rock situated above Brilliant. And here the crowd sang his favorite hymn, Nearer, My God, to Thee. The singing continued for a very long time as the people did not want to leave his grave. The sun set behind the mountains and the shadows descended on earth. Dusk was approaching. All the people knelt once again before departing. To this day, Peter the Lordly is honored and commemorated as one of the most beloved leaders of the Doukhobors.